Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to a Thanksgiving Day edition of FPC Radio Live. That's right, folks. We don't take days off here, unless they're Wednesdays, which is our scheduled day off. But holidays will not stop us. We got football today. We got 3 football games. It's going to be a lot of fun. It always seems, though, the classic games, the traditional games, John, both teams are never quite good at the same time. Like for years, it was always like, oh, great, we get the Lions on Thanksgiving every year. I think someone was bringing it up a couple years ago, even not even a long time ago. That why do the Lions always get their Thanksgiving Day game? It's time to change it, because the Lions stink. Well, guess what? The Lions are really good. It's the Packers that kind of stink. They're kind of much like the Patriots. They're just kind of a mediocre team that has some talented players, just not a whole lot of collective talent. And they're kind of just treading water right now. So it should be interesting. And by the way, we're already 30 seconds into the show. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that turkey is a vile, vile, vile piece of food. And I hope everyone out there is enjoying their Thanksgiving by eating ham, chicken, any sort of other meat besides that. And hey, John, you know what? Why not go off the beat and just go like straight Italian food or something like that? Anything but turkey, John. Anything but turkey.
Well, we're going to have turkey, and I do like dark meat, but, you smother it with gravy, and you got mashed potatoes and squash and stuffed mushrooms.
Well, I mean, look, that looks like a system. That sounds like a system meat that needs to be carried by his teammates.
That's true. It is. So. It is a system meat. Yeah, Brock Purdy is the turkey quarterbacks, right?
Yeah, well,
right? All the fixings around him.
Yeah, he's also leading the league in the thing that won Aaron Rodgers MVP in 2021. So tread lightly, my friend.
Easy with that. Aaron Rodgers was the turkey, the stuffing, the squash, the mashed potatoes, and the pumpkin pie all rolled into one. That's how good he was. But yeah, I mean, Trent Williams would be the stuffing. You're talking about the 49ers who play in the nightcap. And it's interesting. Usually the nightcap is a pretty good game because that's one the league selects. Obviously, you have Detroit at 12:30. Then you've got the Dallas at 4:25. And then the night game is, whatever the league deems to be a worthy game. And I think we've got one tonight. Seattle hosting San Francisco. The only problem is Seattle has some injuries. Geno Smith's supposed to play, but he's kind of banged up, and Kenneth Walker, their fine running back, is most likely out. So maybe that game isn't going to be as good as we anticipated. But the interesting part about this is all 6 teams are from the NFC, and it's all interdivisional games, right? You got Green Bay at Detroit. You've got Washington at Dallas, which Washington at Dallas, if both teams were really good, that's the best rivalry in football. If both teams were really, really good, that's a tremendous rivalry. And then, again, tonight we got Seattle hosting San Francisco, so it should be interesting.
Well, when's the last time they were really, really good? And I'm not just talking about, someone's kind of in contention because it's the NFC East, and that's what we saw for years, was the NFC East was just 9-10 wins is pretty much the cap there, and that wins you the division. So pretty much every team was at some point in contention. But the early 90s?
Are you talking about Detroit and Dallas?
No, I'm talking about Washington and Dallas.
It's got to be because, Washington, they haven't won but one playoff game since 1991. Dallas at least has won some playoff games and has made it to the postseason. 2 or 3, yeah. 4.
I mean, it's really not that big of a difference.
No, it's the same as Brady won in 2020 when 4 playoff games to win the Super Bowl. So, they haven't been good together, and Dallas is clearly the most valuable franchise in all of sports, and Washington is top 5, just got sold for over $6 billion. It's a great football market if they can ever get their act together. Yeah, it's been a long time since both teams have been good. I think you have to go back to maybe 2015 when Detroit and Green Bay were both good, right? Detroit made the playoffs that year, and also Green Bay made the playoffs that year. So, that's probably the last time that happened. Seattle and San Francisco, they've been, along with the Rams, kind of taking turns winning the NFC West. So, you know what it is, Ian? Football is so popular, not exactly breaking news, that you could put any matchups today, people are going to watch it, especially the middle game. That's the one that draws the best ratings because it's the Cowboys. You could put the Cowboys against, Medford High in Massachusetts, and it would be, a great ratings bonanza.
Look, the continued ratings bonanza of Thursday Night Football is evidence of that. I mean, how many mediocre games do you tune in? You're like, we laugh at it, but then 5 hours later, we're sitting in front of the TV and we're watching it. We're like, what are we doing? What are we doing? we're watching two teams that barely know how to play football. We've seen that, like, you know what I mean? Like, we've seen some bad. Sorry about that. Excuse me.
That's Turkey getting back at you for criticizing.
Yeah. I'm choking on it. I'm choking
Were you
on my own
attacked
words.
by a turkey as a young man at some point?
No, but I have been chased by one on a golf course once, and let me tell you, that turkey. I don't think that turkey's ever going to chase me again. I'm just going to say I scared it off. I did not harm it physically, maybe emotionally. Maybe it's emotionally harmed. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like maybe I did do that, but physically, no. If anything, John, turkeys should love me.
True.
I'm advocating for them not to be eaten. So, if anything, they probably love me. But hold on one second. Oh, sorry. I've been getting over a cough, and it's lingering. It's cold down here in Florida. I mean, 55 degrees this morning.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure it's freezing down there.
Well, it's all relative, John. It's all relative. So, but anyway, so yeah, I mean, obviously, Thanksgiving. It's everyone's getting together with their families, and by the end of the night, they're going to be sick of them, and they're just going to want to be begging to be home. And by then, we'll hopefully get a very nice little nightcap to end this Thanksgiving day. But I do want to mention real quick, because we're going to give our top 5 teams. We'll pick these games, of course, as well. But I didn't get a chance to mention it on Tuesday, and I don't know if you had heard it as it as it was said or whatever. But Tom Brady recently talked about how the league is. There's a lot of mediocre football, and I look. Anytime he says things that kind of back up things that I've said, it's just going to boost my ego more and more. But we've been kind of talking about this for weeks, and I think people, it's become a little bit more of a mainstream talking point now. The mediocrity in quarterback play. Look, we were talking about that long before some of these other guys, John. I'm going to give us credit for that, because we saw it pretty early on that it just wasn't. It didn't seem like things were living up to the hype, and it got us into a lot of these discussions about everyone for the last couple of years. We're talking about, oh, we're entering this golden age of quarterback play, and the reality of it is, it might be the opposite. Because again, we have some nice young players, no doubt about it. But nice young players, it doesn't scream golden age, and relative to the age of quarterback play that we're coming out of, it's absolutely going to be a step back. And I think people have to understand that. And I think it's evidenced by the product that we see on the field each and every week. And it doesn't mean that we don't see greatness. It's just, it's not as consistent, and it's a lot more sparse. And I think it's not just the quarterbacks. And Brady's point was kind of the collectiveness, the lack of practices, the lack of physicality, bad habits are created through this change in philosophy. Some of it's to help players, remain safe, obviously the less physicality to prevent concussions, but in a way, the opening up of offenses, and to his point, has created a lot of bad habits from the quarterback position, because you're not as accountable. And to that, he was basically talking about, like, how players, offensive players, it was on their shoulders, especially the quarterback, to protect your players. Like, you knew that if you went against a Ray Lewis, was his example, a Ray Lewis led team, you're not going to throw the ball in the middle of the field, because you're putting your teammate at risk. And it created a whole different set of decisions and set of decisions to be made at the quarterback position. And that speaks a lot to how the game is played then versus what it is now. Things that, have created this boom in offense where, John, in 1999, and I'm not a big passer rating guy, but it just kind of gives you a good little idea of the inflation of numbers, but in 1999, the average passer rating was 78. You know what it was in 2018?
Somewhere in the mid 90s.
98.
98. So it went up 20 points, roughly 20% as well. Yeah, I mean, that would be like saying, people were winning batting titles in the late 90s with a 320 average, and now, they're winning batting titles hitting 384 or something like that. So obviously the numbers have gone through the roof. Fewer interceptions, more touchdown passes, just more accurate, right? Because there's a lot more short passes, and quarterbacks are taking what the defense
more accurate on the stat sheet, but not
on the stat sheet, but not necessarily when the eye test. Exactly. Yeah, it's a little bit different. Like you could see, like Mac Jones has a high completion percentage, but it doesn't really mean much to me because I don't think he's that accurate a passer. If you're throwing half your passes behind the line of scrimmage, you should complete a pretty high part of those. This is all. Well, I know Patrick. I set you up for that.
That wasn't a cough that I was trying to. That was a very specific cough. Yeah,
but it's just what's happened too is I think the talent's there, right? But it's just the way the game is played now. There's no hitting in terms of practice and in training camp and in the off season, and you can't contact players literally and figuratively, and offensive line play is really poor. And now all the defenses are using the cover 2 defenses, which force you to go on a 12, 13 play drive, and the young quarterback's patient enough to do that. Brady was a master at that. Like, just take what the defense gives you. Next thing you know, you're inside the 10, and he had so many different ways to get the ball in the end zone. The young quarterbacks aren't ready for that. So I think maybe their young quarterbacks have to learn to play a little bit more than they did in the past. Plus, everybody's in a rush to move on, right? Like, there was a time where a quarterback would sit his first year, play a little bit of second year, maybe become the starter his third year. Now it's like, we drafted this guy, Bryce Young. He's probably not ready to be an NFL starting quarterback, but what's Carolina going to do? Sit him? Right. No, they're going to play him. So that's a big part of that problem too. But yeah, the game has changed. Just look, they've added a 17th game. There's Thursday night football, which is crap because these teams aren't,
there's not enough good teams in the league.
And then there's a lot of there's an incredible middle class, but that is what makes the sport somewhat interesting. Is that maybe someone when we get to the postseason will pop and make it to the Super Bowl. Now last year the top 2 seeds in their respective conferences got to the Super Bowl, Kansas City, Philadelphia. I don't know if that's going to happen again this year. Maybe someone sneaks in and gets hot at the right moment. We've seen that before, but. Yeah, the quality of play is not that great, but like you said, Ian, they can't help themselves but get great ratings. Monday night's game between Philadelphia and Kansas City, rematch of the Super Bowl, was the highest rated Monday night game since 1996, which just blew my mind because there's so many more options now. 1996, it's only a decade after Bruce Springsteen sang about, 57 channels and nothing on. Now there's like 957 channels and nothing is on.
How much of a boost was that from those Taylor Swift fans, huh?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're all checking out the Chiefs.
And look, I mean, it's part.
Doesn't hurt, right?
No. I mean, I'm sure. I say it kind of sarcastically, and I'm sure it wasn't like the overwhelming factor, obviously, because we do know that the NFL is a machine, and as we continue to evolve in this digital era with so many different ways to consume it, it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So you're right. I mean, but like that's the thing. It's like you don't have enough good teams to fill out 3 primetime games. And for the most part, and for a good chunk of the season, you're talking about 4 primetime games every week. I mean, think about the international series. We've had 4 international games? So that's 4 weeks so far out of 11 that we've had 4 standalone primetime games. We do not have 8 really good teams in this league, John. So it is impossible. I mean, I don't think we have 6 really good teams, to be honest with you.
If we did, you'd have to schedule them that way, and you don't know going into the season. Like Cincinnati, obviously with the injury to Burrow now, is a completely different team.
Even then, though, I mean, they were early on in the season.
They weren't playing at a high level. Yep. No, Buffalo's supposed to be a Super Bowl contender right now. If the season ends today, they wouldn't make the playoffs, right?
And kind of along, going back to kind of what Brady said about the mediocrity, and I said this a few weeks ago that I think this era of open football. It props, like, great quarterbacks are going to be great regardless. Like, do I think Patrick Mahomes would be successful in most situations? Sure. I mean, the kid's obviously got talent. I've never said he doesn't. I question the level of how he was elevated, and I think we're seeing some of my doubts kind of come to fruition a little bit in the last couple seasons. But like, I think overall, John, and I said this, like I said, a few weeks ago, that this era is going to prop up mediocre quarterback play. So we look at like, oh my God, he, look at this, look at, Baker Mayfield's playing great. It's like, okay, great. Bad quarterbacks are going to have great weeks. Doesn't mean that they're great, but the totality of it is, John, their numbers look better than a lot of the really good quarterbacks from 20 years ago. So, yeah, how do you reconcile that? How do you sit there and say, well, no, Kirk Cousins isn't better than John Elway? You know what I mean? Like, how do you reconcile that? You don't. So I think, and I hate to pile on Kirk Cousins because, well, I mean, he just seems to be the poster child for this. But I think he is like the perfect example of a guy that has a lot of really good skills and qualities as a quarterback, but has his numbers have been more greatly impacted by just playing in this openness of an era. Like if he were to play, if he would have started his career in 2001, I don't think he'd honestly be in the league. Let's be honest. I think he's a guy. Mm-hmm. I think he's a guy who plays pretty good football in a offensive favorable league. That's what I think he is. So when people sit there and say, well, look, he had the same numbers as Tom Brady in this year. And I'm like, I don't care. I don't care because again, it's about the result and not necessarily all these numbers don't always line up. And it's especially now it's so hard to, again, cross compare with eras and the problem with Brady is he played in both, so it's like, at least like if people are sitting there arguing about like, Mahomes numbers versus like Otto Graham, then you're just going to say, okay, this is just silly. But since Brady played, but he also played in an era that was still.
He played in the Otto Graham era.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't want to say that, but I mean, he certainly, the era in which he started his career wasn't any different than Dan Marino's. And it's constantly, what would Dan Marino do in this era? No, Dan Marino was a beneficiary of it too, because it was 1978 where we got the really first big rule changes that really ushered in a more pass happy attack. And it took a few years for offenses to adjust. You're not going to go from years and years of being a running based sport to becoming a air attack overnight. It's just not going to happen. And we obviously we saw that over the last 15 years with the evolution of these rules, where it just didn't happen overnight. It happened a lot quicker because at this point, when these rule changes were taking place, they were a little bit more direct and impactful. When you start to really police the defense a lot harder, well, yeah, of course the offenses are going to explode because they're going to have more opportunities, John. Like, I mean, it's very simple cause and effect. And some people refuse to see it, mostly Chiefs fans for obvious reasons. But, the reality of it is it's just now I think it's going to take some time for us to sit back and say, well, maybe not every quarterback that has some physical gifts is a great quarterback, because I think that's the default is we see a quarterback come in that can run and has a strong arm and makes a play or two in shorts at the combine. All of a sudden he's a great quarterback, John. Well, let's pump the brakes a little bit and just kind of see, let's wait a little bit and see what happens, because greatness isn't just about putting up numbers, and certainly not now where anyone can put up numbers.
Yeah, I mean, maybe start to compare quarterbacking to maybe the skill set of baseball players, right? Because you can look at some baseball players and they look phenomenal in their uniform. Someone like Willie Mo Pena, right? Or just pick some guy who's like, 6'4", 250, jacked with no body fat, and you go, well, this guy must be incredible, right? And then you see him in batting practice, he's hitting 550-foot home runs, and then he gets into the game and he can't hit. Meanwhile, you look at, I don't know, John Kruk or Kirby Puckett, a guy who looks like just an average guy down the street, and one of those guys is in the Hall of Fame because he hit 315 in his career, and he didn't necessarily look the part. He was 5'8", about 220 and kind of round. But it's like a different skill set, so it doesn't have to be just. Do you remember Jim Druckenmiller, who I believe went to Virginia Tech and was drafted by the 49ers? He was as physical a specimen I've ever seen a quarterback, like 6'4", 240. He lifted with the offensive lineman. He had a rocket for an arm. He couldn't play the position. Yeah. It's like he was He was Milos in Seinfeld.
Yeah, there you go.
See,
that's that's more my yeah. Looked
the
part, talked the part, but
Sergio Tacchini outfits,
yeah.
Rossignol racket sprung perfectly, great sneakers. He was wearing Fila or Adidas sneakers, and like, this guy must be incredible. This is Roger Federer, and then couldn't get the ball over the net. So yeah, that is oftentimes what happens. But yeah, it's just it's a different skill set, and it's something that they have to evolve into, right? Like, I think every quarterback, if they're really the guy, they get better every single year. And you were talking about like 1978. If people want to really be impressed with some crazy numbers, go look at Dan Fouts' numbers.
Oh yeah,
like there's a reason he's in the Hall of Fame, and he never made it to a Super Bowl, but his numbers are like, wow, that they would look good today, let alone in the late 70s, early 80s.
Well, it's like, and like I said, one of the things people argue is like, oh, well, Patrick Mahomes, look at his numbers in his first, 6 seasons versus Brady. I'm like, I don't really care. Matt Stafford has better numbers, quote unquote, than Tom Brady in his first 6 seasons. That means nothing to me because it's more about the evolution of the offense in the league. And it's not that I'm dismissing it. It's just, again, when your argument is heavily influenced by offensive numbers, which coincidentally in an offensive league with, inarguably, whatever. You can't argue with
inarguably. Sounds
inarguably.
Better.
Yeah, it sounds better. It sounds a little bit
we're
more.
Not going to argue about that.
No, we're not going to argue about that. But inarguably, obviously, like Mahomes relative to Brady started out with a lot better offensive skill set of weapons. So like, if you're going to, your big case is ultimately, he has better numbers. Well, of course he has better numbers in a more offensive happy league with better skill position players. Of course. That doesn't sway me, So again, it's not all about numbers. It's not all about box scores. It's there's more to it.
He's also playing for an offensive coach, right? Andy Reid,
sure.
Brady played for a defensive coach and Bill Belichick. Peyton Manning, Jim Moore, and Tony Dungy were defensive coaches. So, to do what he did, basically they said offense, which was a wise decision. Same thing with Brady, although, he had good offensive coordinators, as did Peyton Manning. But, look at a person like Adam Gase, who was his offensive coordinator in Denver. He got 2 head coaching jobs.
Yeah.
Thanks to Peyton Manning, kind of like Josh McDaniels got 2 head coaching jobs thanks to Tom Brady, and Gates and McDaniels were both disasters. So,
right.
I think they should fork over 10% of their net worth. Exactly. Look at the offensive coordinators that Rodgers won his MVPs with. 2 with Hackett, 1 with Joe Philbin, who was a disaster in Miami. Yeah, the quarterbacks make these guys a lot of money. I've said it. Kraft, Belichick, White, McDaniels, whoever. I'll give 10% of your net worth to Brady. Call it a goat tax.
Right. I like that, a goat tax.
The mob does it, right? So why not Brady?
No, hey, look, you're not going to get any argument from me here. So, inarguable, right? No, I don't know. Now
is inarguable.
Yeah. Now I'm questioning everything.
Get the thesaurus out.
Yeah, I'm working on it. But yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. I mean, I don't know. These debates, I don't have any hope for them changing anytime soon. But it is what it is. So all right, real quick. Green Bay, Detroit. You taking Detroit?
Yeah, Detroit will win. I think it'll be a high-scoring game, though. I kind of get a feeling these games might be high-scoring, like the league wants to see some offense on Thanksgiving since it's been a low-scoring year. But yeah, Detroit, although they had an emotional win on Thursday over Chicago.
Every win's emotional for Detroit.
It really is, because it's like they're 8-2 for the first time since 1962. I wasn't even alive. JFK was president. So yeah, look, if this is their day, and they deserve it now because they're a legit Super Bowl contender.
All right, Washington at Dallas. I'll take Dallas, obviously. Again, there's potential. This could be a great game. I mean, Sam Howell is your league's leading passer right now. They can put up some yards. So we'll see. But, I'm going to take Dallas.
I like Dallas, but I like Washington with the points. It's up to like 13, so unless most people think that Washington is just thrown in the towel, they traded in 2 fine pass rushers a couple of weeks ago, but they're always involved in these weird games, Washington. I mean, they played Philadelphia twice up, and this is their biggest rival. So I think they'll keep it close, but Dallas will move on.
All right, the 49ers, an MVP candidate.
Trent Williams.
There you go. I was waiting for you to chime in with that. Heading to Seattle. Look, again, I mean, this is traditionally, no matter what the records are, these teams are usually pretty good. But like you mentioned before, some doubt around whether or not Geno Smith's going to play. I like San Francisco regardless. Obviously, I think they're one of perhaps the two best teams in the league. We'll find out in just a few moments when we give our top 5 teams. But I like San Francisco in this one.
Yeah, I think this will be a close game. Seattle's a tough place to play. Seattle's 4-1 at home this year. They lost a game they should have won last week against the Rams. That may cost them the division. It may cost them even a playoff spot. But San Fran, when they're healthy, is tough to beat. But I think Seattle will keep it close.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, all right, let's we're going to close out the show and head into the holiday day, given our top 5 teams after 11 weeks. And we've seen shuffling each week. This has been a kind of a strange season in that sense, and it kind of follows the same thing. There's just no real dominant teams necessarily. There might be a couple. They're starting to maybe separate themselves a little bit, but anyways, I'm going to start with my number 5 team. It's a bit of a surprise, John. Maybe not. I don't know. The Houston Texans.
Ooh,
yeah, they got a potentially MVP favorite in CJ Stroud. They're starting to play inspirational football, John. One of those cliches, inspirational football. Well, it's kind of true because they're at that point, and I don't think that they're necessarily going to go on a Super Bowl run, but it doesn't mean that they can't finish out the regular season strong, and they're playing like one of the better teams in the league. So I got the Houston Texans as my number 5 team.
I've got Kansas City number 5. They still only have 3 losses, but they just haven't looked good for most of this year. Even some of their wins were not impressive, but I still have them at number 5 because, again, we don't see that many dominant teams in the league, and they do have the pedigree, they have the quarterback, they have the coach. Even though they haven't been on point all year, I still have Kansas City at number 5.
All right, my number 4 team, the Baltimore Ravens. A lot of the same things can be said about the Ravens as you just said about the Chiefs. I mean, a little inconsistent. Lamar Jackson isn't having the MVP type season that he had in 2019. I mean, it's going to be hard to replicate that, but it's not even necessarily that close at this point. But they're still 8-3. They're winning football games, and they're winning tough football games against good football teams. So I got to give my props to the Ravens and say number 4. By the way, my AFC pick to go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that looks pretty darn good, right? I mean, if it's not Kansas City, then Baltimore looks like the top team in the AFC since Cincinnati and Buffalo have underproduced this year. I go with Detroit at number 4. They only have 2 losses. They have the second best record in football. Only team with a better record, the Philadelphia Eagles. I still was kind of unnerved with that loss in Baltimore a few weeks back. They just didn't show up for that game. You can't have that type of situation. And their defense still is somewhat leaky, but their offense is as good as it gets, and it's so balanced and versatile. And Jared Goff showed a lot last week. He was horrible for 3.5 quarters, but then he put together 2 great drives in the fourth quarter to win that game over the Bears. I have Detroit at number 4.
Yeah, and Detroit is my number 3 team for, a lot of, I mean, I don't have to echo or repeat a lot of the same things you just said, but you pretty much summed it up pretty appropriately. Yeah, I mean, look, the loss to the Ravens is concerning, but at the same time, maybe at the end of the day, we're looking at saying, well, the Ravens might be the best team in the AFC, and the Lions being one of the 2 or 3 best in the NFC. So, sometimes those losses happen. I still like the Lions in this situation, and I think they're just gonna keep playing some pretty good football down the stretch.
Yeah, number 3 for me is San Francisco. When healthy, maybe the best team in football. The problem is when they are missing like 1 or 2 components on offense, they really slide down. Mm-hmm. Again, Brock Purdy's really good at quarterback, but he's not a guy that's going to elevate mediocre talent. So got to keep Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel and obviously Christian McCaffrey healthy. If they go into the playoffs with those guys playing at a high level, they're going to be tough to beat. I have San Francisco at number 3.
Yeah, and they're my number 2 team. Again, for a lot of the same reasons you just kind of summed up. Got to stay healthy, like you said. I mean, you can't go into the season down one of those big key guys. And look, I agree. I think Brock Purdy's playing some really good football, but he does kind of, so far, I mean, we could be looking back 6 months from now and saying, yeah, we were foolish to say that. But, he does look like a guy that, yeah, he can play some good football, but he doesn't necessarily elevate those around him. Doesn't mean that he can't be elevated or play great football on par with them. It just means that, when push comes to shove, he's not the guy that's lifting these guys up. And we've seen San Francisco have offensive success for years now with varying different quarterbacks, and a lot of it has to do with the players and the system, so to speak, just how they run their offense and the West Coast, everything like that. So yeah, I got San Francisco as my number 2 team.
I've got Baltimore at number 2. Again, they do have 3 losses, but in 2 of them, it's like they had hiccups in the fourth quarter, which was an issue last year. It's kind of been an issue for Baltimore the last couple of years. I can never forget that they gave up 5 touchdowns to the Dolphins last year. They had like a sizable lead and ended up blowing that game. They're like 90% of the way to being maybe the best team in football, but they still have these issues closing out some games, which is kind of interesting because they can run the football.
Right.
So I think they're going to have to clean that part up, but their defense is still really, really good, and they're in pretty good control of that division, although give Cleveland a lot of credit. Cleveland's 7-3 with poor to mediocre play from their quarterbacks, but I have Baltimore at number 2.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, where do you rank Cleveland among all this? Because it's no doubt that their defense is great, but even with Deshaun Watson, the offense was questionable, and now it's like they could potentially be turning to Joe Flacco. Well, yeah, it's a lot of interesting stuff. But anyways, so it seems as though we're both going to agree on our number 1 team, and that is the New England Patriots. I am living in a state of denial, and I believe that it's still 2007, and it's never going to change. No, obviously, the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, even for the best team, and I think it's very clear that right now they're the best team in terms of, their record, and they've beaten some good teams, and it's like, this isn't Kansas City of a couple years ago. It isn't Kansas City last year. So, it's an impressive win nonetheless. And they're the only team with 1 loss. I guess they're playing the most consistently out of in a season that has seen a lot of inconsistency. And I think overall they have the fewest weaknesses. They don't necessarily have the best anything, maybe defensive line, but even then, San Francisco, I'm sure, can argue that. They don't have the best defense. They don't have the best offense. They got a lot of great talent, but they do a lot of things really well, and I think you see that throughout the week. And I know a lot of people are talking about, just a drop pass here or there. They created 2 turnovers in the red zone, John. They intercepted a terrible pass from Patrick Mahomes. I don't know what he was thinking on that, but they also caused a fumble. So that's more or less what won the Eagles the game, not, a pinpoint, dealing with a drop. Yeah, I mean, technically, yeah, you could sit there and say, Kansas City could have taken the lead. They could have won this, that, and the other. They wouldn't have even been in that situation had they not turned the ball over in the red zone, and that's what the Eagles did. So my number 1 team for now and might be for a little while is the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, me too. And I think it's time we give Nick Sirianni some credit as a really good coach, right?
Yeah.
Because 9-8 in his first year, 14-3 last year, comes so close to winning the Super Bowl. Right now, 9-1. You would think there would be that Super Bowl hangover. No, they're right back in contention. He lost both coordinators to become head coaches, and the ship just keeps on sailing. And again, I always maintain with Philadelphia, they're going to be in every game because they're so dominant along the offensive and defensive line. Yeah, to me, that's just like having a great pitching staff. Like, you're going to be in games if you're a baseball team with a great pitching staff. Maybe your offense is up or down, but if you have that great pitching staff, you're going to be in games, and that's what Philadelphia does, I think, better than anyone, both along the offensive and defensive lines. And they're going to be tough to knock out, and right now it looked like they would have home field advantage, and that's not an easy place to play. Their only loss, Ian, came against the Jets, and they kind of gave that game away.
Yeah.
There's a couple of turnovers in the second half, and the Jets took advantage of it. So they're clearly, I think, number 1 right now.
Yeah, no, and again, I mean, it doesn't mean that they're so far ahead of everyone else, but right now it at times it does kind of feel that way. Save for maybe San Francisco is the only one in their kind of realm right now. So, at least in my opinion. So, anyways, that's going to do it for us here today. Thank you everyone for tuning in and listening to us, rant and rave about all these stupid, silly things. But hey, that's what we do, John. That's what we do, and that's what we're going to continue to do, even if it's Thanksgiving or Christmas or, well, not Festivus. We celebrate Festivus. We take that very seriously, and that's coming up. Well, actually, a month from today. So as soon as today's over, start gearing up for the airing of grievances. It is coming. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.